31 inches of tissue. That is the measured distance along one continuous sheet of connective tissue inside your body between the front of your hip and the underside of your jaw. 31 inches. And for most of you watching this, that tissue has been compressed, shortened, and pulling downward for decades without a single symptom you would have connected to your face. I want you to understand why that matters. Because if what the anatomy suggests is true, then a significant portion of what we call lower facial sagging has nothing to do with your face at all. It has to do with a muscle buried so deep in your core that you cannot touch it from the outside. A muscle that most fitness professionals describe as a hip flexor and then move on to the next exercise. They are not wrong about what it does. They are incomplete about what it is connected to. The average adult in a developed country spends between 9 and 10 hours per day in a seated position. That number comes from accelerometer-based studies, not self-reporting. Self-reporting underestimates sitting time by about 2 hours because people forget how much of their day is spent in a chair. 9 to 10 hours. And during every one of those hours, the primary hip flexor, a muscle called the psoas major, sits in a shortened, contracted state, doing nothing harmful in any given minute, accumulating something significant over years. Here's what makes this confusing. There is a generation of people, your grandparents' generation, or perhaps your parents, who spent the majority of their waking hours upright. They walked to work. They stood while cooking. They bent, lifted, carried. Seated leisure was limited to a chair in the evening with a book or a radio. And if you look at photographs of those people at age 70, their jaw lines tend to look different from ours at 50. Not always, and not in every case. Genetics matters, sun exposure matters, nutrition matters. But the pattern is visible enough to notice once you start looking. The lower face held differently, the chin sitting higher relative to the neck. For years, the conventional explanation pointed to collagen loss and gravity. And that explanation covers part of the picture. Collagen does decline with age. Gravity does pull tissue downward. If those were the only two forces acting on the lower face, the decline would be roughly uniform across populations with similar genetics and sun exposure. It is not uniform. And the variable that correlates most reliably with the difference is not skincare, not surgery, not even diet. It is how much of the day the body spends in a position that shortens the front of the hip. That correlation is what started this investigation. Not a conclusion, a question. What is the mechanical relationship, if one exists, between hip flexor length and lower facial position? And can a single stretch, performed correctly for 60 seconds, begin to reverse whatever that relationship produces? To follow this evidence, you have to be willing to look at the body differently than most anatomy courses teach it. Most anatomy courses teach muscles as individual units. This muscle goes from here to here, it performs this action. That is accurate as far as it goes, but it misses something that dissection research over the last 20 years has made increasingly difficult to ignore. Connective tissue does not stop where muscles stop. It continues. It wraps one muscle, leaves that muscle, enters the next, wraps it, leaves it, enters the next. A single sheet, continuous and unbroken, connecting structures that no anatomy textbook placed in the same chapter. The psoas major is the first clue. Most people learn the psoas as the muscle that lifts the thigh. You use it to climb stairs, to bring your knee toward your chest, to walk. That is its most visible function. But the psoas is unusual among muscles. It does not attach to one bone and then another bone. It attaches to every single lumbar vertebra. 5 vertebrae, each with its own attachment point. And it does not attach with a clean tendon like your biceps does. It attaches through broad, thick sheets of fascia that spread across the front of the spine like a curtain. Those sheets are the first half of the connection. The second half lives directly above them. Your respiratory diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle that drives breathing, does not float independently at the base of your rib cage. It anchors itself to the lumbar spine through two muscular pillars called the crura. And those crura share fascial tissue with the psoas. In several published dissections, researchers found it impossible to separate the two with a scalpel without cutting through a continuous fascial layer. The psoas and the diaphragm are not neighbors. They are structurally fused through shared connective tissue. A study published in the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies examined cadaveric specimens specifically to determine whether the psoas and diaphragm could be considered independent structures. The finding was unambiguous. The fascia investing the psoas continued without interruption into the fascia investing the medial arcuate ligament and the diaphragmatic crura. Continuous tissue, not close to each other, continuous. Now, there is a reasonable counter-argument. Anatomists who favor the traditional model point out that functional independence matters more than structural continuity. Two muscles can share fascia and still operate independently, the way two buildings can share a wall and still function as separate businesses. And in healthy, well-balanced tissue, that is largely true. The psoas contracts, the diaphragm moves. Neither particularly disturbs the other. But that functional independence depends on something specific. It depends on the shared fascia being at its resting length, slack enough to allow each structure its full range without transmitting tension across the boundary. When the psoas shortens chronically, when it remodels to a contracted length after years of sitting, the slack disappears. The shared fascia tightens, and now the diaphragm feels what the psoas is doing. I want to use a comparison from cooking here because it almost works, and the place where it fails is exactly the point. Think about how a reduction sauce operates on a stove. You start with a liquid that is loose, thin, free-flowing. As heat extracts moisture, the liquid thickens, concentrates, and the flavors intensify. The sauce becomes denser because material has been removed. That is not what happens in the psoas. The tissue does not lose material. It lays down additional collagen crosslinks. It becomes denser not because something is removed, but because something is added. The tissue remodels itself to be shorter and stiffer by building new structural fibers within the existing matrix. A reduction sauce can be reversed by adding liquid back. Fascial shortening cannot be reversed by simply adding space. The new crosslinks have to be mechanically loaded, slowly, under sustained stretch, to trigger the enzymatic processes that remodel them back to a longer resting length. That distinction matters because it explains why sitting up straight for an afternoon does not fix this problem. The tissue has physically changed. Good posture without sustained loading is like turning off the stove and hoping the sauce thins itself. The sauce does not know the stove is off. The tissue does not know you sat up straight. It has remodeled, and it will stay remodeled until a mechanical signal tells it to change back. So, the psoas shortens. It transmits tension through shared fascia to the diaphragm. The diaphragm receives a downward pull that it was not designed to resist continuously. And now the investigation reaches a critical junction, because what sits above the diaphragm, and where does the pull go next? If you have been addressing lower facial sagging through exercises that target the face directly, through creams that promise collagen restoration, through injections that add volume beneath the skin, I am not here to tell you those approaches are worthless. They are not worthless. Facial exercises can strengthen the muscles around the mouth and jaw. Certain topical compounds can modestly improve skin hydration and elasticity. Injections can restore volume where volume has been lost. But I want to ask a question that those approaches cannot answer. If lower facial sagging is primarily a surface phenomenon caused by collagen loss and gravity, why does it accelerate in people who spend more hours seated? Why does it correlate with hip flexor stiffness more reliably than it correlates with sun exposure? And why do people who maintain hip flexor mobility throughout their lives tend to maintain lower facial structure longer than people who do not, even when other variables are controlled? Those questions do not have a surface answer. The surface explanation handles the what. It does not handle the why. Creams work on the skin. Exercises work on the facial muscles. Injections work on the subcutaneous fat pads. Each approach addresses a layer. None of them addresses the pull that is coming from below. And if the primary driver is not collagen loss at the surface, but mechanical tension transmitted from the core, then surface interventions will keep producing temporary results because they are treating a symptom while the cause continues to operate 31 inches away. That is the limitation of approaching the lower face in isolation. The single exercise I am going to walk you through today addresses one specific link in this chain, the psoas release that reduces downward tension on the diaphragm. It is effective for that link. But the full chain has multiple points of intervention, multiple positions that work synergistically when performed in the right sequence over 30 days. That complete sequence is what I put together in the Connected Face protocol. It is in the description below if you want the full system. For now, let me show you why the chain continues and where it ends up. Above the diaphragm, the connective tissue continues into a region most people never think about, the mediastinum. That is the space between your lungs that houses your heart, your major blood vessels, and the esophagus. The fascia lining the diaphragm's upper surface is continuous with the fascia surrounding these mediastinal structures. And that mediastinal fascia, in turn, is continuous with the prevertebral fascia, the connective tissue running along the front of your cervical spine, the front of your neck. This is the portion of the chain that changes the investigation entirely. Because the prevertebral fascia in the neck connects to a bone that most people have never heard of, a bone that does not connect to any other bone, a bone that floats, suspended entirely by muscles and fascia in the front of your throat, the hyoid bone. You can feel it yourself if you place one finger gently on the front of your throat, roughly halfway between your chin and your Adam's apple. Swallow. The small horseshoe-shaped structure that moves upward and then drops back down is the hyoid. It weighs almost nothing. It measures about 4 centimeters across, and it is, structurally speaking, one of the most consequential bones in your body for the appearance of your lower face. Here is why. The hyoid is the anchor point for 2 groups of muscles. Below it, the infrahyoid muscles connected to your sternum and your shoulder blade. Above it, the suprahyoid muscles connected to the underside of your chin, to your mandible, and to the base of your tongue. These suprahyoid muscles form the floor of your mouth. They are the muscular hammock that supports everything between your chin and your throat from the inside. When the hyoid sits at its proper vertical position, this muscular hammock is taut. The tissue beneath the chin holds close to the mandible. The lower face looks defined, structured, lifted. When the hyoid drops, when it is pulled inferiorly by tension from below, the hammock loosens. The floor of the mouth sags. The tissue beneath the chin moves away from the mandible. And the lower face looks heavier, softer, older. This is measurable. A 2016 study in the Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery measured hyoid position in subjects across multiple age groups and found that inferior hyoid displacement correlated with visible changes in lower facial contour. The researchers attributed the displacement primarily to muscular changes with aging. They did not measure hip flexor length. They did not assess psoas stiffness. They measured the effect without tracing it to its most distal cause. A separate body of research coming from movement science rather than maxillofacial surgery has documented that psoas release produces measurable changes in diaphragmatic excursion. When the psoas lengthens, the diaphragm moves more freely. When the diaphragm moves more freely, the fascial tension transmitted through the mediastinum and up the prevertebral chain decreases. These are separate studies from separate fields, measuring separate variables. Neither set of researchers connected their findings to the others. That is the gap this investigation sits in. Maxillofacial surgeons study hyoid position without asking what pulls it down from the core. Movement scientists study psoas release without tracking its effects above the diaphragm. Both fields have measured real phenomena. Neither has traced the full chain. Let me lay the anatomy out cleanly, because the mechanism deserves a section where I do not use any comparisons. Just the structures, their connections, and the direction of force. The psoas major originates from the transverse processes in vertebral bodies of the 12th thoracic vertebra through the 5th lumbar vertebra. It descends through the pelvis and inserts on the lesser trochanter of the femur. When it contracts, it flexes the hip. When it shortens chronically, it pulls the lumbar spine forward into increased lordosis and draws the front of the pelvis closer to the rib cage. The crura of the diaphragm originate from the bodies of the first 3 lumbar vertebrae on the right side and the first 2 on the left. They share the anterior longitudinal ligament and the fascial investment that also covers the psoas attachments. The tissue connecting these structures has been described in dissection studies as inseparable without cutting. The diaphragm's crura and the psoas fascia are a single fascial unit at the lumbar spine. The diaphragm's superior fascia, the fascia facing the thoracic cavity, is continuous with the endothoracic fascia. This fascia lines the inside of the rib cage and extends into the mediastinum, where it becomes the mediastinal fascia. The mediastinal fascia surrounds the pericardium, the esophagus, and the great vessels. At the thoracic inlet, the upper border of the chest cavity where the neck begins, the mediastinal fascia becomes continuous with the prevertebral fascia of the cervical spine. The prevertebral fascia descends from the base of the skull along the front of the cervical vertebrae. Within this fascial plane, the longus colli and longus capitis muscles operate. The prevertebral fascia also has connections to the carotid sheath and, at the level of the 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae, to the fascial investment of the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is suspended between the suprahyoid muscles above and the infrahyoid muscles below. The suprahyoid group includes the mylohyoid, which forms the muscular floor of the mouth, the geniohyoid, which connects the hyoid to the inner surface of the chin, the digastric, which connects to the mastoid process in the mandible, and the stylohyoid, which connects to the temporal bone. When the hyoid is at rest in its normal position, these muscles maintain the floor of the mouth at a specific height relative to the mandible. When the hyoid is drawn inferiorly by tension from below, these muscles lengthen and the floor of the mouth drops. The distance from the psoas attachment at the first lumbar vertebra to the hyoid bone, measured along the fascial plane described above, is approximately 31 inches in an average adult. Every inch of that distance is continuous connective tissue. No gaps, no interruptions. One sheet, folding, wrapping, transitioning from structure to structure, but never ending and beginning again. Continuous. That continuity is what transforms a hip flexor stretch into a facial structure intervention. Not through magic, not through wishful thinking, through mechanical transmission of tension along a physically continuous pathway. There is a counterpoint worth examining. Some researchers have argued that fascial force transmission over long distances is theoretically possible, but practically insignificant. The argument is that fascia is viscoelastic. It absorbs and distributes force rather than transmitting it like a rigid cable. And that argument has merit. Fascia is viscoelastic. It does absorb force. If you tug sharply on the hip flexor, the force does not arrive at the hyoid like a pull on a rope. But chronic shortening is not a sharp tug. It is a sustained, constant, low-grade compression maintained for hours per day over years. Viscoelastic materials respond to sustained loads differently than they respond to acute loads. Under sustained loading, they creep. They gradually conform to the applied force over time. The tissue does not snap to attention. It slowly, incrementally adapts. And over years of sustained psoas contraction, the cumulative creep along 31 inches of continuous fascia produces measurable displacement at the distal end. A 2019 study in the journal Fascia Research measured force transmission through the deep front line using ultrasound elastography in living subjects, not cadavers. The researchers applied a sustained stretch to the hip flexor and measured tissue displacement at multiple points along the anterior chain. They found statistically significant displacement as far as the cervical region. Not dramatic displacement, not centimeters, but measurable, consistent, and reproducible displacement in the tissue of the anterior neck. I considered comparing this system to a software dependency chain, where a change in one low-level library propagates through every application that depends on it. And at first glance, the comparison holds. The psoas is the base library. The diaphragm depends on it. The mediastinal fascia depends on the diaphragm. The cervical fascia depends on the mediastinum. The hyoid depends on the cervical fascia. Change the base, and every dependent structure adjusts. But the comparison fails in a critical way, and the failure is the lesson. In software, you can patch a single dependency without touching the others. You can update one library, recompile, and leave the rest of the stack intact. In the fascial system, you cannot patch the hyoid independently. You cannot inject a fix at the level of the throat and expect it to hold while the psoas continues pulling from below. The system is not a stack of independent modules communicating through an interface. It is a single continuous material. Patching one segment while the adjacent segment remains under tension is like trying to iron one section of a shirt while someone is pulling the other end. The wrinkle moves, it does not disappear. That is why surface interventions produce temporary results. They are patching a local segment of a continuous system. The results last until the tension from below reasserts itself, which it does because the psoas has not changed. There is something worth noticing about how different generations relate to this chain. People who grew up before desk-based work became the norm. People born in the 1930s and 1940s maintained psoas length through daily activity without ever performing a stretch. Their bodies did it for them. Walking, bending, carrying, climbing stairs. Every one of those movements cycles the psoas through its full range. No protocol was needed because life was the protocol. The generation that followed, born in the 1950s and 1960s, experienced the transition. Their early years involved significant physical movement. Their working years introduced prolonged sitting. Many of them show the pattern I described earlier, a lower face that held well through their 40s and began losing definition in their 50s and 60s, accelerating through retirement as activity levels dropped further. The current generation of adults, those born in the 1970s, 1980s, and beyond, has spent the largest proportion of waking hours seated of any generation in human history. And the pattern of lower facial change is appearing earlier. Not dramatically earlier, but consistently, measurably earlier. The sagging that used to become visible in the 7th decade is now appearing in the 5th. And the correlation with seated work hours is strong enough that researchers studying postural changes have begun to notice it even when facial appearance was not their primary variable. None of this proves that psoas shortening is the only cause of lower facial sagging. It is not the only cause. Collagen loss is real. Gravitational effects are real. Subcutaneous fat redistribution is real. Genetic variation is enormous. What the evidence suggests is that there is an additional force, one operating from below, one that conventional facial treatments do not address, and one that responds to a specific mechanical intervention. This brings us to what you can do about it. The stretch I am going to describe takes 60 seconds. It targets the psoas specifically, not the rectus femoris, not the iliacus alone, but the psoas major in its capacity as a deep core structure with fascial connections to the diaphragm. The positioning matters. A generic hip flexor stretch, the kind you see in fitness classes, targets the superficial hip flexors, but often misses the psoas entirely because the psoas sits so deep that reaching it requires a specific angle in a specific pelvic position. If you are someone who sits fewer than 4 hours per day and maintains regular physical activity that includes hip extension, walking uphill, lunging, climbing, you may find that your psoas is already at a reasonable resting length. In that case, this stretch serves as maintenance. 60 seconds per side, 3 to 4 times per week to prevent the gradual shortening that accumulates even in active people. If you sit between 4 and 8 hours per day, which includes most working adults, your psoas has likely shortened enough to produce some degree of diaphragmatic compression. In your case, the stretch should be performed daily, 60 seconds per side, every day, ideally at the end of the workday when the psoas has been in its shortest position for the longest time. You will likely feel the stretch not in the front of your hip where most people expect it, but deeper, somewhere behind the lower belly, a sensation that is hard to locate precisely because the psoas sits behind the intestines against the spine. If you sit more than 8 hours per day and have done so for more than 5 years, your psoas has almost certainly undergone significant remodeling. The collagen crosslinks I described earlier are established. In your case, the stretch needs to be performed twice daily, and the initial sessions may feel like you are stretching against something that does not want to move. That resistance is the remodeled tissue. It is not dangerous. It is not injury. It is the tissue announcing that it has adopted a new resting length and does not intend to change without sustained mechanical input. Here is the position. Kneel on your right knee. Place your left foot flat on the floor in front of you. Left knee bent at 90 degrees. Your right knee should be directly below your right hip, not behind it. Most people place the back knee too far behind the hip, which stretches the rectus femoris and the iliacus, but allows the psoas to stay hidden. Tuck your pelvis. This is the critical detail. Roll the bottom of your pelvis forward, as if you are trying to flatten your lower back. You will feel a stretch in the front of the hip deepen significantly when you do this. That deepening is the psoas engaging. Without the pelvic tuck, the stretch bypasses it. Now raise your right arm overhead and lean very slightly to the left. 2 to 3 inches of lean, no more. This lateral shift opens the fascial connection between the psoas and the diaphragm's right crus. You may feel the stretch extend upward from the hip into the lower rib area. That sensation is the shared fascia between the psoas and the diaphragm being loaded. Hold this position for 60 seconds. Breathe into the stretch. Specifically, try to direct your inhale into the right lower rib cage, the side that is being opened. Each inhale presses the diaphragm downward, and when the psoas fascia is under stretch, the diaphragm's movement applies additional, gentle traction to the connection point. You are using your own breathing to augment the stretch at the exact location where the psoas and diaphragm share tissue. After 60 seconds, switch sides. Left knee down, right foot forward, left arm overhead, lean slightly right. Same pelvic tuck, same breathing direction, now into the left lower ribs. 2 minutes total, both sides. For those of you with knee sensitivity, the same stretch can be performed standing. Place your right foot on a low step or a thick book, about 6 to 8 inches high, behind you. The ball of your right foot is on the surface. Your heel is lifted. Bend your left knee slightly. Tuck your pelvis exactly as described above. Raise your right arm and lean slightly left. The stretch will be less intense than the kneeling version because the hip angle is less extreme, but the psoas still receives a meaningful load. Hold 60 seconds. Switch. For those of you over 70 or with significant balance concerns, this stretch can be performed in a doorway. Stand in the door frame. Step your right foot about 18 inches behind you. Hold the door frame with your left hand for balance. Tuck your pelvis. You do not need to raise your arm. The pelvic tuck alone from this position will load the psoas. 60 seconds per side. What will you notice and when? This is where I want to be precise rather than promotional. The fascial remodeling I described earlier does not reverse overnight. Collagen crosslinks that took years to form require weeks of consistent mechanical loading to reorganize. In the first week, what most people notice is a change in breathing. The diaphragm moves more freely when the psoas releases its pull on the crura. Breaths feel deeper. The rib cage expands more laterally. That is the first link in the chain responding. In weeks 2 through 4, some people report that the area beneath the chin begins to feel different. Firmer is not quite the right word. Closer is better. The tissue feels closer to the jaw. This is consistent with reduced inferior displacement of the hyoid. The suprahyoid muscles, no longer accommodating a depressed hyoid, return toward their resting tone, and the floor of the mouth lifts. Visible changes to the lower face, the kind another person would notice, typically require 6 to 12 weeks of daily practice. That is the timeline for meaningful collagen remodeling along 31 inches of fascial tissue. It is not fast, it is not dramatic, and it does not replace collagen that has been lost to age, sun exposure, or other factors. What it does is remove a downward mechanical force that was making the collagen loss look worse than it needed to. The sagging that was structural, caused by tension from below, diminishes. The sagging that was biological, caused by tissue aging, remains. Most people have both. Removing one reveals how much of what they attributed to aging was a mechanical problem with a mechanical solution. There is a sobriety to that finding. The same mechanism that explains why the stretch works also explains why it has limits. You cannot stretch your way back to 25. You can release a pull that was making 50 look like 60. The distinction matters because it is honest. And honesty is what will keep you doing this consistently, rather than abandoning it when you do not wake up transformed on day 3. 14 days, that is the challenge. 60 seconds per side, every day for 14 days. By day 14, you will know whether your breathing has changed. You will be able to feel with your own fingers on your own throat whether the tissue beneath your chin sits differently against the mandible. And if it does, you will have your answer. Not my answer, yours. Measured on your own body with your own hands against your own starting point. If nothing changes in 14 days, this mechanism was not your primary driver, and I am wrong about your specific case. I can live with that. The stretch has no side effects, no cost, and takes 2 minutes. The only risk is that you spend 2 minutes per day for 2 weeks and learn something definitive about your own body. If something does change, if the breathing shifts, if the tissue lifts, if the lower face begins to look like it did a few years ago, then you have discovered something that no cream, no injection, and no facial exercise could have given you. You have found the source, not the symptom, the source. I want to take a moment before closing and say something that I mean specifically, not generically. You followed a chain of evidence from the front of the hip, through the diaphragm, through the inside of the chest, up the front of the throat, to a floating bone beneath the chin. That is not a simple argument. It required patience. It required a willingness to suspend the instinct that says the face is just the face and the hip is just the hip. Most people would not follow that chain. Most people want the stretch at minute 1 and the promise at minute 2. You followed 31 inches of anatomy because you wanted to understand the mechanism before you trusted the protocol. That kind of attention is rare, and it is the reason I make these videos at this depth. Thank you for bringing it. If this investigation changed how you think about the connection between your posture and your face, subscribing lets me know that this level of detail is worth the time it takes to produce. And if you found a specific moment in this video that shifted how you understand your own body, I would genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. Not because the algorithm rewards engagement, but because those comments shape which investigations I pursue next. 31 inches from your hip to your jaw. One continuous chain pulling in one direction for as long as you let it. 2 minutes a day can change that direction.